first Wednesday webinar for February, Hanging with the Fellows, Challenging the Future of FM with Wayne Witzel. Everyone has been muted for audio quality. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them into the question or chat box, and we'll go over them during the Q&A portion of the webinar. A PDF of the PowerPoint will be distributed after the webinar, and they'll also be posted into the Corporate Facility Council's online community. Okay, without any further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Wayne.
Thanks, Joshua. Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another First Wednesday webinar. I'm very honored and happy to be here again talking to everybody. And I have a new concept to share with you this time around. I was talking with Serena Pancoast and trying to come up with an idea to really maximize teaching around management, leadership, soft skills around FM. And we came up with this idea called Hanging with the Fellows. And just to give you some background here, when I first started at IFMA back in 2000, I really didn't know what a fellow was. I met a couple, and then when I moved to Sacramento, to the Sacramento chapter, I got to know Kit Tuvison personally, and he was just such a great help. I adopted him as a mentor. I don't think he had a choice in the matter. And I ended up seeing John one day at a World Workplace event, and it struck me that fellows are people that always reach out and help others. That was like the common denominator among all these folks. And it's never ceased to happen. Every time I've met an IFMA fellow, they're always willing to extend a hand, always willing to help, always willing to coach. And I feel like I have this family around me. If I ever get into trouble, I can reach out and talk to them. And I encourage you to do the same thing. So where this idea is going for this series of presentations is to explore what this particular fellow is doing now. What's, as Kit Tuvison would put it, what's the church of what's happening now for each of these fellows? What's their cutting, bleeding edge, their most important thoughts on FM right now? And obviously some of that might be largely philosophical, and the vast majority of this presentation is going to be philosophical and aspirational. The topic at hand here, challenging the future of FM, doesn't necessarily lead itself to a 10-step program to accomplish it. So I'm saying that going into this, but we will incorporate some tips, because if I'm not anything, it says I'm practical. So I am going to try to marry some practical tips with this larger philosophical idea. So it's not about having all the answers with a neat little bow on top at the end of all this. There will be questions, but it's overall meant to inspire to a new road, okay? So how this topic came about is I was taking some CFM study classes from John, and he was recommended to me as a teacher. And I encourage you also to seek him out for that purpose as well. And I saw John's presentation at a monthly program on challenging the future of FM, and I was hooked, because he used a very powerful and simple graphic to convey a complex idea, and that's right in my wheelhouse. I love graphics that convey, that leverage a lot of knowledge into a very powerful, condensed graphic. And when I saw what he had there, I said, John, I've got to talk to you. I want you to be part of this Hanging with the Fellows. So I interviewed John, and what you're going to see today is the result of that interview that I had with him and what he shared with me. So let's get to it here. So let's first start with this section of FM, what I call the FM philosophy, the philosophical side of all of this. So how do you view your FM role? If you were to analyze how you spent your days at work, how would you define your role? And if you're familiar with the myth of Sisyphus, that's the myth where Sisyphus was condemned to push a boulder up a hill, then down a hill, then up the hill, then down the hill. It was this long, repeated effort that he had to do as his punishment. And sometimes, I mean, in FM and in many other lines of work as well, professions, we're lurching from one routine task to another, only to repeat it again next week or next month. And sometimes a comfortable routine can be a warning sign in some cases, but they call that, I think, a vicious cycle. And the question to ask is, are we in a groove or are we in a rut? There's a difference. If we're grooving along and you're moving towards something, or is this a comfortable rut that we're in? And sometimes if it's steady work and we're getting along in our profession, we might be comfortable in that rut. But as you're going to see, that might put us in a dangerous position here. And the next thing is, how do others view your FM role? If people look at you from the outside, what conclusion would they come to about your role? It's funny, I have some friends at my daughter's school that I told them what I do in a way, but a couple of them sat me down once and they asked me point blank. They said, "Are you in the CIA?" Because from the outside, they see me traveling. They see, I do some speaking and things like that, and I'm kind of, a ghost maybe sometimes. And they really were serious. They didn't know what I did. It was just interesting to see their observation of me, what it looked like I did from the outside. Well, in FM, what does it look like to the people at your office and your organization, to your friends? Is it that you're always with the cell phone in your hand, answering emails within 30 seconds of them coming to you? Are you in a cold sweat every day? It might not be. Are you comfortable behind the desk with a few layers of coordinators and supervisors between you and the clients? It's a good question to ask, and even ask others, what do you think I do? And get that feedback from them, because that's going to play into some of the things we're talking about here. So in starting this discussion with John, this mental picture came up into my mind here that FMs and facilities, they deal with problems and requests. And really the FM box, so to speak, is a clearinghouse for problems and requests. We process them and we send them on their way. And they keep coming here from different sources, different avenues, internal clients, et cetera, stakeholders, and we handle that and we process it and send it on its way. Now, that's kind of the mental picture that I had, and then John showed me this model that I'm going to get into right now that expands upon this and really shows some of the weaknesses and the possible strengths in our current FM paradigm. So here's an example. This is the beginning of John's model here. If we have clients or stakeholders and they have a problem or they have a request and it arises, what do they do with that request? Well, they send it to us. It could be, hot and cold call, they're out of paper, the fixture in the restroom is broken, it could be a cleaning request, another hot and cold call, somebody needs to schedule a restack, the coffee machine's broken, or another hot and cold call. And we get these things in the FM department, and they're sending us these requests. Well, what do we do in turn? Well, the FM goes to the service provider, and they take those issues and they go to the service provider and say, hey, we're out of coffee in break room 7 on the 3rd floor. Or they go to the paper vendor, the HVAC vendor, and say, hey, you guys have to come out and adjust the VAVs. I mean, we go to them to get an answer. Now, what happens in turn after that? Well, the service provider comes back to us with an answer. Wow, now things are really beginning to happen. We've got a flow going. So they come back to the FM with their answers. So what does the FM in turn do after they've communicated to the service provider? Well, they start doing their job and they provide resolution back to the client. And this is the FM doing his or her job. So the reality is this. We've got traffic flow going from the clients to the FM, to the service provider, back to the FM, back to the client, and around and around and around we go. And for most FMs, this is the position that they are in. They are processing as a clearinghouse for problems and requests, bottlenecking and going through them. This isn't facility management, it's facility administration. There's a big difference here, okay? Administering requests and processing issues and being a go-between doesn't make it management, it makes you a middleman. And as a middleman, you are now bottlenecked between these clients and service providers. And if you don't, know the history, or you're not even looking at current events, middlemen are usually the first to get automated, downsized, or outsourced. Now, just coincidentally, this morning I got an email about a bookstore in San Francisco called Borderlands. Great bookstore. Bought many books there. I got signed copies of some of my favorite books there by the author. It's just a great place. I took my daughter there. Well, I get an announcement today that they're closing down because San Francisco raised the minimum wage to $15. And, you know, the owners supported the law, but they can't afford to stay in business. And they actually wrote a you know, pretty detailed reason why they can't stay in business as a result of this law and what it would mean. It kind of pulled back the covers on these people who have worked so hard for this business. Well, the thing is that they're middlemen in the industry. I mean, there's other things obviously that are going on with you know, changing in Amazon and online bookstores and so forth, but they are the first to go whenever there is downsizing, economic issues. The middleman is the first one that they look at. So right there, that tells you it's a dangerous position to be in. But it also shows you really how this can be a position of being a commodity as opposed to being something that's innovative and adds value. Now, I'm going to not necessarily contrast this. I'm going to compare this to something that is, you know, a little extreme here, but I'm using this next thing to really drive home this point, okay? If you replace this model and you replace it with Herbert at the Burger Barn, okay, who's been there 10 years, you know, he's top dog at the Burger Barn. When he has an angry customer who you know, got onions on her burger and she didn't want onions on her burger, where does she go to? She goes to Herbert. She complains to Herbert. Herbert then goes to the service provider, you know, Fred the cook. What does Fred do? Okay, I'll resolve it. He comes back with another burger. He goes back to the client. You know, this is our model. And to show you that this is the model that's used in many commoditized professions and services, it shows you the danger, because here's, if you haven't been paying attention, there's a lot of talk going on now in fast food restaurants about getting rid of Herbert and putting a touch screen there so people can go directly to the service provider. Okay, and now even more so, they're talking about automating the cooking process in fast food. They're talking about literally having robots make the burgers and send them on a conveyor belt back to the client. So they're talking about getting rid of the middleman and the service provider and automating both of those processes. So the point here is when SM becomes a commodity, this is your inevitable trajectory. When things get commoditized to that point, we start looking for minute, efficiencies and trying to find ways to keep the current paradigm going. And eventually somebody's going to out-innovate you, and that might leave you on the outside looking in. And that was John's, point here so far, is that we are a middleman and a facility administrator in most cases, and not being a strategic manager. So the question is our time being spent optimizing this model? Or as John puts it, are we optimizing the box that we're in to make the box more cozy, comfortable, and streamlined, and existing solely within that paradigm? And obviously, I'm sure you've already come to the conclusion that this extra traffic through the FM has added some cost and added some time to this model. And whether it's cost of opportunity, extra things that you're having to, extra legwork that you're having to do instead of doing something more strategic. So let's look at this from a different angle. Is this you? Is this an optimized FM, someone that's chained to their phone? I know we live in this fast-paced world where people expect you to get back to them in 30 seconds from receiving an email. But are FMs really just good cat herders? As FMs, are we good at making sure our staff doesn't drop the ball? Is that our value? That if a request comes in, we bird dog it to make sure that Sally or Fred doesn't forget it on our staff? This is a purely administrative function. This is not a management function. And I know so many FMs are in this position where they're nervous and fearful that if that request comes through their bottleneck and they don't hop on it and jump on it right away, and they get very good at jumping on it and taking care of it right away, so much so that the FM perceives his or her value to be the speed at which they process these requests and not dropping the balls. But that's simply becoming a better administrator, a more streamlined administrator of these duties. So let's look at it this way. I'm a big fan of, if any of you have ever spoken to Kit Tewison, he's known for his Tuviisms and his models and so forth. And one thing he always says is, if we could divide the world into two categories, let's look at it that way. So this is my Kit Tewison two-category model, looking at this administrative view versus a more strategic view. And as you can see on the administrative side of things, you've got all the hallmarks of this paradigm. It's very reactive. It's very rigid. This is the way we do it. This is the way we process this. There's a lot of control and micromanagement because if something falls through the cracks, that immediately affects your value because you've justified your value in how quickly and comprehensively you respond to those issues as they come in. It's very granular. It's dealing with task by task. And it does communicate cost. That's the number one thing that tends to come out of this model because you're in a commodity. And in commodities, cost is the number one discussion, not value. It's very internally focused, and you tend to hear this phrase a lot. We've always done it this way, or some derivation of that. It's very org chart driven in the sense that you've got lines. This is the way we handle this. This is the chain of command. This is how it goes through. And we stay where the rubber meets the road. Literally, that's the most important part for us in this model. We're staying right there on top of the task. And the focus is on contract administration, and I'm going to contrast that with something in a second. It's also, this model is marked by fear, a lot of burn up and burn out in your staff and in yourself, and it's really administering your department. Now let's contrast that with the strategic side of this. And listen, you guys have seen these contrasts numerous times. It's reactive versus proactive. I mean, that's ubiquitous. We always hear about that, but it's true. I mean, you can see how that FM model I just showed you with the cars there is a very reactive model. It's not proactive whatsoever. There's no flexibility in that. It's not systems driven. And, in a strategic model, as an FM, you're going to understand the surface all the way up to the 50,000 square foot perspective, and you can deep dive back and forth in between those levels. You're communicating value when you're more strategic. You tend to be more organization-focused rather than your own department. You use critical thinking to solve your problems, and you're solution-driven. And instead of staying where the rubber meets the road, you look for new roads, or you build new roads. And as far as this contract administration versus strategic management, quick story here. I had a client who wanted his FMs to do more than just administer vendor contracts. He said, look, Wayne, I've got my FMs, and they're becoming very good at reading contracts. But that's what they do. They don't go beyond the contract to understand what the vendor does, their subject matter expertise, how they can be a strategic partner for us and our overall goals. And he wanted me to come in and help them with part of their excellence program to get these FMs into mini SMEs. So they would start thinking more strategically, and rightfully so, because he knew that if he did that, if these FMs really got that, they would start thinking more strategically about their vendor-partner relationships, and that value would translate into the organization. Is there fun in the department? Are we just in a cold sweat every day, working with a small crew to try to process all these things? Or is there some way that we're looking toward a longer-term strategic goal that we can hack away at and build confidence and fun into our day? And lastly, this is John's large point here. Are we being administrators of our department, or are we showing leadership in the overall organization? And his main quote here is, and this hit me hard when he said it, we're working ourselves out of a job by working inside the box. And he point blank said, this is a model that will result in the extinction of FM. It's a commodity model, and it really puts us in a position of painting ourselves into a corner, because a micromanager is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Eventually, the micromanagement becomes, you micromanage yourself out of a job. See, when you have a bottleneck in an organization, the pressure in the organization builds up behind the bottleneck, and it creates, what we call a hot spot. It's an area that people look at. It's open for view. And when there's that kind of a hot spot and that pressure behind a bottleneck, people ask, well, why is there a bottleneck there? And sometimes there are good reasons for those in a system, and sometimes there's not. But these kinds of bottlenecks also foster a lack of responsibility in your team and in your vendors. because they have to go through you as a bottleneck. So why are they going to make a decision if they know it has to go through you? Better check with Fred. Better check with Sally. You know, I can't make the decision. You know, for a few years I did retro-commissioning work with the federal government and academic facilities. And for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with retro-commissioning, it's literally going into a building, looking at all of its energy and utilities consuming systems and bringing them back in alignment with their most efficient operation today. And I've met many folks in the boiler room who, I think of one guy in particular, who he was the only guy that knew how to repair this 33-year-old piece of equipment. He was the only guy that could do it. No one else could. Now, why is that? Because he was protecting his job. He didn't share the knowledge that you've got to take the hammer and hit the side of it here to get it to work, or whatever the case may be. He had that knowledge, and no one else did. So, excuse me, Josh, were you on? Could you mute your phone? I think there's someone there that's not on mute.
I think John Martin's just joined us. It might be John.
Oh, okay. Hey, John, mute your phone if you get a chance. Thanks. So this guy in the boiler room was a bottleneck. Now, what do you think happened when we retro-commissioned their facility? We went in and we said, okay, as part of this retro-commissioning, we're recommending this new piece of equipment. This new piece of equipment goes in. Do you think that he was relevant anymore? No, because everybody got trained as part of that new piece of equipment on how to maintain that new piece of equipment. So all of a sudden, he's on the outside looking in because he was protecting his little world, was not open to anything new. He certainly wasn't going out and researching the latest and greatest, technology on the market so that when it came, he would be a subject matter expert. No. So I just share that story because this is what bottlenecks tend to produce. It's a dangerous situation to be in. So let's put it this way. You either have to innovate or you will be automated or irrelevant. Those are your choices. It's what is it, the law of thermodynamics. I mean, this is basically it, okay? So I want to overlay this onto the S-curves. Some of you might be familiar with S-curves. I first got turned on to these by watching a futurist, Joel Barker. If you ever get a chance to look at any of his stuff, it's pretty mind-expanding stuff. He's a futurist, and his brain works in a whole different way, a whole different level, but he's very good at communicating those things. What you're looking at here is a graph of a paradigm shift. Okay, so an S-curve basically shows that as a new technology develops down here, okay, it gradually starts to gain acceptance, and then everyone starts accepting it, and it becomes a commodity. And once it becomes a commodity, it becomes very ubiquitous. Everybody's using it. Everybody's doing it, and it reaches really its peak in its capacity, and you start getting diminishing returns from the investment in that model. And eventually that model will start to trail off and lose efficiency and not be competitive. But usually once this zone starts to happen, you'll see innovation start to take off, and someone else will get an idea about the way they could deal with this industry or whatever it might be, whatever industry we're talking about here. And they start working on new technology, new models, new ideas, and eventually a breakthrough is made. And at that point, you have early adopters that join into that new innovation, and then it starts a new S-curve. And you can chart technology and history and industrial revolutions based on S-curves. But where we are right now in the FM community is we're right here. We are at the apex of the current FM curve. This is where we sit. And we have an opportunity here to leap curves, to become early adopters in new technology and new concepts and new ways of doing things in FM. But it takes courage. It takes courage to jump from here. It also, we'll talk about this later, but as some of us are progressing and getting, a little older and in our careers with not much left on the back end, why go through the trouble? Why change? I've got 10, 20 years left. I can coast on this current model, and I'm not going to have to deal with that curve as it goes down, maybe. Okay, or are we going to consider that the success of our industry and the success of the people behind us that we're hopefully mentoring rides largely on us jumping onto a new S-curve. And part of that, it becomes some psychology of change as well. I mean, when we do transition, we're talking about somebody says, okay, we're going to change, and everybody's excited about the change, okay? And some people say, well, no, nothing has to change. That's denial, okay? But usually people that go through change, they do follow, some simple and common stages through that where the change is hard, okay? There's no doubt that when you talk about this model here, okay, this is uncomfortable because look, this technology or model is lower than the existing one because it's still being worked out and worked on until it takes off. But this is what they call the salad days of this particular model. But what happens is eventually some people say, this isn't for me. I'm sure all of us have had an experience where we put a new CAFM system in or something new goes into our company or even in our personal lives, a new system, on a board we sit on or whatever, and we say, I can't deal with this, I don't like this, I'm out of here. And we just leave, right? Or people say, I'm not going to use the new system. Sometimes change will eject people from your organization or it might even eject you from your organization. But for others, they'll go through the process and accept these changes and move forward. But I'm showing you this because if you're not prepared to go through some fierce threat, guilt, and depression and a change, you're not going to make it onto the other S-curve. It's going to be difficult. I've got no magic bullet. There's going to be resistance from many directions. But the alternatives of being irrelevant or outsourced are what you're facing. So it's either accept that the change is going to hurt, it's going to leave a mark, but on the other end of things, as an early adopter, you stand to be in a much, much better position on that new S-curve. So that's kind of the philosophy and John's basic, beginning of John's basic model and his warnings to us and the current paradigm of FM. So what can we do? And I look at it this way, we can build some new roads. So let's complete John's model that he showed me here. The first thing in this model that needs to change is that service provider needs to be a subject matter expert. And what does that mean? That means changing from low-price, technically acceptable people to subject matter experts. And if you can't change that right away, overnight, you need to help that company find their inner SME for you. And I'm going to show you some tips on how to do that shortly. But as a subject matter expert and not just a commodity vendor, because think about it, the triangle that we're showing you is usually replicated in their organizations as well. And they're going through the same bottlenecking and same problems. And if they're a subject matter expert, they're going to approach your relationship in a different manner. So that's the first step. The second step in all of this is to build a new road. And this is what got me so excited about John's model, because it's so obvious that the traffic should be here. Your subject matter expert, service provider and clients, they should be talking back and forth to each other, not going through you. Now, the horror. You can hear the gasps from here. The fear. I mean, think about the fear of that. You mean I'm not going to be involved in that? I'm not going to know if we're out of your courier pods in conference room 7? You mean I'm not going to get that hot and cold call? Or what if the second one comes in and then it goes up to the boss and they hear about it that the accounting department was hot during quarter end close, right? The fear should be a trigger to tell you something. If you're so afraid of a change, maybe that model is you're invested too heavily in that model for it not to be adapted. And it's just a trigger, it's just a warning. Whenever fear, that adrenaline rush comes in over change, it's a good opportunity to ask yourself, what am I afraid of? And at least define it. So now that we've created that road and we put that traffic there in between the two, how do you manage that? Well, the SME sends you proactively the KPIs that you expect on the key performance indicators on their relationship and interaction with the clients. And they proactively send you information that you need to know. If you don't know what those KPIs are or that information, an SME should know. They should be able to tell you. Mr. and Mrs. Facility Manager, typically folks in facilities your size, they like this kind of information. Oh, okay, send me that. But if you want to be able to manage this process, you manage by the KPIs and the metrics when you have an SME that can do the work and take the bottleneck out of yourself. Now, on the other side of this is how do you deal with the clients? Well, you deal with that through client satisfaction metrics, testing, and so forth on indoor air quality and so forth. You can do all kinds of different things to ensure that the result is happening. So you're getting the results back to you instead of all of the actual tasks passing through you that you have to manage. Now, I know some people say that this is easier said than done. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But I will tell you, the SMEs are out there. I am one of them. Okay? I can come in and do a model like this, and I know countless other associates and professionals and consultants that can do this also, and we want to do this, and we can add significant value to organizations by doing this. But there's that fear, or there's the answer, we've always done it this way, or this is our process. And what I'm saying is I spoke with John, and he hammered home the concept to me that if things don't change, this all goes away anyway. You're either going to be outsourced or irrelevant. This model adds value and reduces cost. Talk about something that you can get miles off of with almost every department in your organization, especially the C-suite and finance, anything that adds value and reduces cost. Because you're now not processing all of that granular activity. It's going through an SME that theoretically, and if you set it up this way, should be able to either help you get cost savings or cost avoidance from their subject matter expertise, or they're probably not SMEs. So let's look at what happens if you do this. Okay, so maybe let's throw this aspirational landscape out there and say, here's what could happen. Let's say you do get out of the administrative mindset. What possibilities is that going to open up for you? Well, it could open up a little bit, maybe more time, or give you some openness to education. Now, talking with John, he told me a story. He said, "Look, Wayne, I decided I wanted to learn more, so I went out and I started taking classes on law. I started taking classes on real estate. I wanted to learn about finance. I took some classes. I talked with some friends in finance. I learned how the accounting was done, how the CapEx worked, how it flowed into the budget, everything. And rather than being in that bottleneck, worrying about the Keurig pods in the conference room, he was moving to a more strategic level to say, how can I be of more value in the organization? What do I need to know to do that? And he proactively went out and did that. Is that extra time that you're going to have to spend? Absolutely. But that's the little bit of the pain you're going to have by jumping S-curves. But if you don't do that, we've talked about the alternatives. The other thing you can do with this is, establish relationships and work with other departments in the organization. I mean, think of all the great things you can do with HR to help support them and raise the mindset of facilities in your organization. If you have an organization that looks at facilities as, grease and lube operations, and not a strategic partner in the organization, this is a cue for you, an opportunity for you to start building those kind of relationships to demonstrate that value in the organization. So what else can you do? You can mentor and train your staff for the future. I mean, think about that. I'm sure you've all heard stats from the foundation that we have precious few people under 35 in our industry. and those who are in positions of managers, directors, and so forth are going to be retiring very soon with no one to backfill those positions. So this, whether you like it or not, you are mentoring by example or default. But this is a way to proactively position some of these people for the future. I don't know where I would be without the mentoring I've gotten, especially from people, in IFMA such as Kit and John, Chris Hodges, Lori Gilmer. I think of just countless people that have trained me because, and talking to John, over this interview, he has a passion for that next generation because he understands his time is short in the overall scheme of things, and there's a new generation that's coming up. What are they going to do? How are we going to set them up to succeed? The other thing, too, is you can innovate by exploring the new and the different. and you know, we'll talk a little bit about innovation in a second here, but being open to innovation and having the time to innovate and having the flexibility to innovate, if you're so bogged down in bottlenecking tasks, the last thing you're going to think of is a way to create a different system. You're going to take the existing system, make it work as good as possible, and call it a day. But when you can get out from that system and get some distance from it, you can sometimes see a new pathway. And then lastly, you can put the C back in CFM, the C-suite. There's, I don't know, I mean, some of you have been in this industry long enough. Remember when green and sustainability first hit, everyone was hot to trot on green. And what did many companies do? They hired a sustainability director. And many of you rolled up to that sustainability director, or at least had to funnel some of your SM initiatives through that sustainability director. Well, why is that? Why didn't sustainability in many cases fall underneath facilities as a rule? Because we weren't talking that language. We were thinking to ourselves, many FMs, gosh, do I really want to add one more thing to my plate by dealing with all the sustainability stuff? And because you didn't, the outside consultants came in or they hired a sustainability director, and under a different department in some cases. This is an example where if you can learn this model and start communicating the things that need to be communicated to the C-suite, then your value in the organization, not only personally, but your department, the value of the FM department skyrockets. But if we're bogged down on the other end of things, worrying about the clients and not getting out of that box, we don't even have a shot to communicate to the C-suite. See, this is where the line is drawn here. Above the line, you're talking strategic. Below the line is purely administrative FM work, commoditized work. So what if you refuse to change? What's going to happen? Well, you know, if you refuse to change, you're going to have to be faced with a different paradigm forced on you. And that paradigm is most likely, you know, depending on, you know, the folks on this call, the size of your facility, there's somebody knocking on your organization's door right now. And that's your outsourcing subject matter experts. They're that relentless knock. And what they're doing is they're speaking C-suite to your organization. They speak C-suite-ese. There's the things they're talking about: KPIs, efficiency, customer satisfaction, metrics, et cetera. And they're not just speaking it, they've done this. And they routinely do this at organizations they come into. And that's a very attractive model and language to people in your organization, namely the C-suite. And the C-suite says, wow, those outside consultants really know about FM. They're credible, and we believe their advice. I mean, how many of you have maybe in the past tried communicating some initiative or expertise to the C-suite, and then what you get back is they don't believe you, but they hire a consultant that says the exact same thing, and they believe the consultant. I hear that a lot in public sector, but that happens. And John's quote here, his piece of advice is, if the C-suite is asked to go outside, you've already lost your value. And, you know, where's the FM in this model? Where is he or she? Well, if this happens, this is where the FM is. Okay, the FM is on the outside looking in, hitching a ride to the next gig, because the FM did not position themselves or their department in the organization to add value and talk the language of C-suite. And I can't tell you how many programs and classes there are I've seen come across the IFMA wire on, you know, Dancing with the Stars. Kit Tuvison did one. I know John has one. There's a lot of Chris Hodges and Lori Gilmer teach one. This education to do this stuff and position your stuff for this is out there in our community, so we don't have to be hitchhiking to the next gig. So, you know, that's as I started at the beginning of this, I told you I don't have all the answers. John doesn't have all the answers. None of us have all the answers. There's no magic bullet. But we've defined the current paradigm. We've defined a new possible paradigm for FM. How we get there is going to come from your brains. It's going to come from you innovating and coming up with different ideas, ways to make that leap to the new S-curve. But I've got a few practical things I want to show you because, you know, so many times I take classes and they stay purely on the philosophical, and I'm really trying to give you a couple things here just to help you make a couple of steps toward the new S-curve in a very easy, practical manner. And these are just suggestions for you, but I think they're good ones given the task at hand. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Edward Tufte. Edward Tufte is known as the Da Vinci of data, and his classes that he teaches around the country are always standing room only. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And you have people in his classes that are designers, artists, architects, computer programmers, salespeople, I mean, you name scientists. It runs the gamut. What Edward Tufte is great at doing is taking large, complex data and concepts and distilling them into extremely simple and potent forms, whether they be physical, graphic, text, whatever. So he taught something at this one class I took on the power of the 11 by 17 sheet of paper. You say, what am I going to, how does an 11 by 17 sheet of paper fit in all of this? Well, let me show you. So if you have one sheet of 11 by 17 piece of paper, okay, and just think in terms of the physical paper right now, you can use this kind of framework to get your SMEs to report to you what they're doing. Okay, so if you don't have that kind of good relationship with your service provider right now, and you say, Wayne, I can't go out to bid for these guys for another 3 years or whatever, how can we tighten that up so you can start to move toward that new road where the SME is dealing directly with the client? Well, with an 11 by 17, you can say every month, a quarter, or whatever clip you want, they should produce a report that fits on this paper. And that's good because it forces them to condense their activity into one useful report and not all the fluff. I mean, how many times do you ask for a vendor to give you a report and they give you a phone book back because they think that more volume justifies their existence? This framework, we'll go through it. On the front cover, you should have a thematic goal and dashboard. I'm going to show you what that is in a second. And when you meet with them, you don't need to talk about the things that are going well. You need to talk about the things that are drifting or half-drifted, bad. And we'll go over the thematic goal in a second. But that's the first thing. That's the highlight. The second thing is, what's the current quarter report? What are the KPIs? Now, for some of you, those KPIs might be response time on work orders. It could be customer satisfaction. It could be cost avoidance. You need to work out those metrics with this particular subject matter expert to make sure you're getting the feedback you have to have to get out of the bottleneck and manage through them. Okay, and it's great for graphs. And the reason why it's only on one page is it forces them not to put superfluous information on there, but only what is necessary and important. In the right-hand side, what's coming up in the upcoming quarter? What should we know about? What are the upcoming projects? What goals do you have, SME, for the facility this quarter coming up? What do I need to know? What does my department need to know about what you're doing? And that should be communicated. And then the rear cover is for strategic issues. What's the long-term view? What new technology is coming up in the industry that I need to know about as an FM that you can tell me being an SME? What's the scuttlebutt? Do you have any proposals? Do you have any ideas of ways you can save me money? You know, cost relative to what? You can put that here. What about issues of compliance? Hey, there's a new issue coming down the line with a new title in California, or there's a new water use requirement that's going to be starting in a year. Things like that. So this is a great way. Now the trick here too is you can also use this for your team. Your internal team as well can use these to report their activity to you as well. It's a very powerful tool. And I just say 11 by 17 paper is great because it's something you can hand to somebody. They can see it. It's something that can get passed around. You can do this electronically if you like that. That's fine. but I prefer to have something like this in paper, and I give these to certain clients, and they file them away. They save them, and or put them in a binder so that every time we talk, they can refer back to the previous ones. So let's talk about that thematic goal. So that's the thing that's here on this front cover. And this is a concept from Patrick Lencioni. The thematic goal basically says, look, what is the most important thing we need to be working on right now, SME? Remember, what I'm trying to help you with is to build that road. And you need to have a comfort level that the SME is going to do all the stuff that you normally do that's passing through you. So I'm trying to help you with a tool to give you some of that comfort here, okay, to kind of alleviate some of that fear. So the thematic goal basically says, what is the most important thing you need to work on in the next 3, 6, 9 months? What is that? And you arrive at that with them, okay, and that goal is stated there. Then what, 3, 4, 5 things will they have to accomplish in order to make that thematic goal a reality? What are these things? I'm going to show you an example in a second. Now, separate of that, what are the 4 or 5 things that this SME needs to do every single day, regardless of the thematic goal? What are the things that, regardless, they have to always do? So this model, came from Patrick Lencioni, and if you've never read any of Patrick Lencioni, if you don't like dry, traditional business books, you will love Patrick Lencioni. The reason why, his books are written as fiction. So 3/4 of the book is a fictional story that teaches you the business concept, and the last quarter of the book is just raw business. It shows you the model and raw business dry speed, right? Now, some of his books, just to give you the titles, are Death by Meeting, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Silos, Politics, and Turf Wars, and all the stories take place in the Bay Area in California. So, and there's connected characters between them all. I have every single one of his books literally sitting right behind me where I'm talking to you now, and I refer to them constantly. So if you're trying to get your feet wet into reading business books, I strongly urge you to look into Patrick Lencioni. So here's an example of a thematic goal. What if a tire company, had an issue where all of a sudden their tires were exploding on cars? What's their most important goal, their thing they need to deal with right now? They need to survive by reestablishing credibility. How are they going to do that? They're going to fix the tires. They're going to improve their PR, repair distributor relations, address morale, settle lawsuits. So when they meet together, they're going to ask themselves, how are we doing on fixing the tires? Is it red, yellow, or green? How's the PR, red, yellow, or green? You see what I'm saying? If they do these 5 things, this will happen. And then simultaneously, regardless of what's going on up here, they always need to dashboard revenue, expenses, production levels, market share, and customer satisfaction. Now, to show you how much I love this model, we are going to be implementing this in the East Bay chapter as a playbook that we use for managing our committees and ourselves as the board. So we met at our strategic planning session, and we decided that the most important thing we need to do right now is to implement a succession planning strategy. And in order to do that, these are the 5 things that we need to do to make sure that we implement that succession planning strategy. Separate of that, always to be a successful chapter, when we meet together, we need to look at membership delta, program attendance, financials, sponsorship delta, and effective communications. And I do this in a little different way. These are printed out, and people circle which ones they think it is, and we all have a discussion as to what it really is, and then we talk about the red things. There's no need to talk about a green thing. And what this does is this creates alignment where all of your organizations are aligned behind that most important thing. Together, it will happen. I just show you this because imagine all of your SMEs having something like this officially. Now, some of you, I have to say, CBRE and Jones Lang LaSalle, they do this. They have quarterly business reviews, and some of the folks of those outsourced organizations do those reviews better than others. Some are purely commodity, cost. They don't care about value. And if that's the model for them at that particular site, that's what we deal with. But others really do get behind a value add, a cost avoidance, that kind of stuff. If you can get your SMEs to start thinking about the things you consider most important, have them feed this back to you on a routine clip, you're going to feel more comfortable handing off those bottlenecked tasks to them. Okay? You want more knowledge about this, read Silos, Politics, and Turf Wars by Patrick Lencioni, or a book he has called The Advantage, which is a little different. The Advantage is a sum of all of his other books in a condensed form. Okay, now we're going to get right to the what I call the root cause. If you're going to do any of this kind of stuff, you need to know your number one enemy. Most knowledge workers have not been taught a system for personal productivity and task management. This includes not only the people on your staff, possibly you, but also possibly your vendors. Okay, there's two major symptoms for this. One is a bloated email inbox with thousands of emails in it, and the second is a sparse calendar with no time booked on it for specific tasks, or the only thing on your your staff's calendar is invites you send them. I'm just showing you this because you are planning on making a leap to a new paradigm. You are going to have to make sure that people are actually able to handle that leap and manage the tasks and the transition. But I'm here to tell you, after doing this, I've given this presentation to numerous IFMA chapters and councils. As a matter of fact, there's a free webinar already on the CFC's website on this. I've given this talk many times. It's the most popular thing I do. People ask me to come talk about this all the time because it's how can you put this? It's the dirty little secret. Most of us have 5,000 emails in our inbox, and we manage from our inbox. We search for the things we need to do. Why am I telling you this? Because if you don't deal with this root cause issue and you try to embark on these new roads, it could be a mess. Because people right now work their system, they have this, all of a sudden you're going to be giving them some other things they need to do to pilot these new avenues and new roads, and they can't even manage what they have now. So I strongly urge you to check in with your staff, get a look at what their email inbox looks like. Have a look over their shoulder at their calendar, or look at it online if you have access to it. If there are problems, you can show them this webinar if you want, but absolutely read this book. And if your organization is big enough to support and have the budget, have David Allen or one of his reps come out and talk to you about this concept. If you want to be positioned for the future as a knowledge worker, this is the skill set you need. I guarantee you the new S-curve, that's going to be permission to play stuff. You're not going to be able to even get on that new curve unless you know how to do this kind of stuff. Next is get outside your box. Now, I had a challenge a friend gave me about 3 years ago, and I basically decided that I was in a feedback loop. I was in a house of mirrors. I was only reading and listening to the things that I liked, that reinforced my paradigm. And so I intentionally started, signing up for groups on Facebook or LinkedIn, or watching, news programs I wouldn't normally watch, reading things I wouldn't normally read, to open myself up to things. Now, in some ways it moderated my position. In some ways it strengthened my existing position. But if you've ever looked at innovation on a graphic, there's usually two lines that intersect. It's taking an issue or a problem or a concern, and it intersects with something from left field. It's like, how can you take, pineapples and a calculator and put those two together and innovate? What can come from that? It's these two seemingly incongruous concepts that, when they intersect, forms an innovation. You don't get that thing from left field unless you venture out there once in a while. You have people that all they watch are Fox News, or all they watch is MSNBC, and the twain shall never meet. I don't do that. I intentionally try to listen to both of those sides. It's not so I moderate the position. It might be so I understand my position better. Same thing is true in FM. Get out there and look at things outside the box, not things that are just self-reinforcing. This was John hammered this home to me during our interview, that you have to do this. If you don't, you're going to be on the outside looking in. He also told me, communication is important. Know where you sit in the organization. If you're under HR, you've got to learn to speak soft programs. Finance is obviously cost, and ops is you've got to speak downtime. And remember, when you're talking about this stuff, cost is always relative. Whenever somebody says, how much does it cost, you have to say relative to what? Or you already know what they think it should be relative to, and you position the cost relative to that item? Well, an easy one is in the data center, right? The cost of downtime relative to what? That's easy math. But when you say, well, we're going to put in this new system or this new piece of equipment and so forth, you need to frame that in a relative way. And actually, if you have questions about that, Chris Hodges and Lori Gilmer have some good concepts on that you can find online. And always communicate value. You know, if we're always sending out this cost, that's eventually how people are going to look at us as a cost center instead of a value center. And then, you know, lastly here is don't stifle your staff's creativity. It's almost like we hire, you know, new people on our staff. Hey, welcome aboard, Timmy. You know, here's your standard issue blinders. You know, we've always done things a certain way here, Timmy, and this will make sure that you do too. The restroom's down the hall on your left. Have fun, right? I mean, I've been in jobs where I come in and I get standard issue blinders, and I'm the type of guy that chafes at that kind of stuff. I love to you know, create, have different ideas and so forth. Think about all the possible lost innovation ideas we have just by making our new employees fall into lockstep with our existing FM paradigm, right? And it's interesting that Josh and I, before this started, were communicating before the webinar, and we were talking about basically what's on the slide is that we don't take advantage of our own organization as much as we should or could. I mean, all the coaching and consulting possibilities, paid and unpaid, that are available to you in IFMA are staggering. I mean, think about the talent that we have, the people who have been there, done that, and are doing that, or want to walk side by side with you to find a new path. You know, I look at it this way. You know, I talk about Kit Tubison a lot, and I consider Kit to be my work dad, and if that's the case, I guess that makes John my work uncle. But you know, I've gotten a lot of coaching and consulting on how to do things better in my job. You guys can do the same thing. I mean, you could pick up the phone and call one of your peers and say, how did you guys handle this particular issue? Most of us are not doing that as much as we should, and I don't know why. I don't know whether it's pride or whether it's not knowing or fear. I don't know. But there's great monthly programs. There's great webinars. I know sometimes there's the occasional dog, you know, that happens, you know, a monthly program that goes south where it ends up being a sales pitch. I know that. You're going to get those. But there are good ones out there. And then talk to your peers and make the most of your membership. Now, you know, I just think you've got folks like consultants like John, Katuvison, FEA, you know, you've got Chris, Lori, Tina, all those folks over there. I mean, there are people that can help. So, final question here. John asked me at the end of this interview, he goes, you know, what do you want your legacy to be? And it's like, wow, I didn't think I'd have to think about that for another, you know, 10, 20, 30 years. But the legacy starts now. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen the movie About Schmidt with Jack Nicholson, but it's this guy who works at an insurance company, and his whole life's body of work are these boxes of files and actuary tables that he's so proud of. And when he retires, they give him the gold watch and the party, and he hands all these boxes to the new incoming young buck and says, here you go. And he's like, this is great, and this is my life's body of work. A few days later, he just, you know, wanders into the office to stop by to see how things are going, and he sees all of his boxes sitting out in the trash. And it's a great flick, but I mean that particular model there is his legacy were boxes of papers that ended up being thrown out into the trash. He was doing things in the paradigm and the way they were. He had his perfectly collected, organized, filed data and actuary tables. But he didn't innovate. He didn't leave behind that legacy. Is this something, you know, you think about? You know, safe doesn't mean strategic. This isn't easy stuff. And as we saw with the S-curves, you know, challenging an existing paradigm never is easy. And John asked me some questions. He said, look, you know, are you in the game or are you watching it? Are you shielded by layers of staff from coaching your staff or getting into the game? Or do you even want to make a difference? Do you want to mentor the next generation of FMs? I mean, look at it this way, okay? This is an opportunity to embark on a new road. You can do it one of two ways. It's going to happen. This is your first option, deer in the headlights, okay? Option number one. And nobody likes being the deer in the headlights when the outsourced SME comes calling. The other option is you can carve new territory and you can be the future of FM. So with that, just real quick, I want to tell you a little bit. I'm with DFS Green. I'd just like to say that I'm proud to work for a company whose CFO values IFMA and allows me to invest so much time in this organization. I wouldn't be able to do these things without him. His name's Corey, and I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to be able to talk to all of you and invest so much in IFMA. And with that, I have some time for questions, and John is on the line with us in case we need to talk to the master himself.
Okay, if you do have any questions, feel free and type them into the chat box or the question box. Okay, I don't see any, and we are at the hour. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to Wayne, or you can feed them to myself, and I'll forward them to Wayne. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the webinar, and everyone have a great day. Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you.